Romans 5, verse 3. And not only so, but we glory in tribulations also, knowing that tribulation worketh patience. So what that verse is saying is not only do we rejoice in our future glorification with Christ, we also glory in our current tribulations. What it's saying is we can and we should glory in the problems of this life. Well, how does that work? How do you glory in the problems of this life? Well, the verse says that tribulation worketh patience. So let me read you this is from the Webster's 1828. This is what patience is. The suffering of afflictions, pain, toil, calamity, provocation, or other evil with a calm, unruffled temper, endurance without murmuring or fretfulness. Patience may spring from constitutional fortitude, from a kind of heroic pride, or from Christian submission to the divine will. And the idea there is that, I'm going to give you a shorthand of this. What patience is it's suffering with calmness. Well, how can we have patience? And what I'm going to simply say about that is you can, because you know in the end you win. So in other words, what happens if I'm just trying to think of a simple example, but the bank calls and they said, good news, we had an error in our records and we've realized we owe you $1 million. And we just need you to come over here and we need you just to sign a receipt for it and we'll give you the $1 million. So you drive over there, but on the way there, you get stopped at a red light and you got to wait. And then you're pulled over and you're giving a speeding ticket, and then you get a flat tire. And if you're like the way we are, you can whine and moan and, oh, life is terrible. I got a flat tire and I got a speeding ticket and I got delayed and woe is me. How terrible it is. And of course, the reality is what you should say is, who cares? This is a speed bump on the way to $1 million. And of course, $1 million is trivial. $1 million has no comparison to eternal glory. Let's get that straight right now, right? But I'm just trying to use an earthly metaphor. Well, here's what happens. We go through life, and there are these speed bumps. They're tribulations. I don't want to say they're not real. They're real. They exist. They're problematic. But are they worthy of being compared with the glory that shall be revealed in us? They're not. So we need to not be bothered by it. We need to have patience. So tribulation worketh patience, because here's what happens. When you have lots of troubles, you learn how to be calm in troubles. Right? That's what it's saying. Tribulation worketh patience. The more troubles you have, the more you should be able to learn how to have patience. Now notice verse 4. And patience, experience, and experience, hope. So tribulation worketh patience. What patience does is it produces experience. So what is experience? This is from the Oxford English Dictionary. It's the third definition. The actual observance of facts or events considered as a source of knowledge. And so the idea there is, through patience, you will observe things and grow in knowledge. So as you have tribulation, you should have patience, you should have calmness in the midst of it. And what's going to happen as a result of that? You're going to learn from it. Okay? You're going to have experience. Now notice what it then says. Experience produces hope. So I'm going to put these things together. So tribulation worketh patience, patience worketh experience, experience worketh hope. So tribulation worketh patience. Troubles produce the ability to be calm in trouble. You're going to have troubles in this life. And the response to those is not to complain, it's to learn how to be calm, how to have patience in the midst of them. And patience worketh experience. So if you keep calm during the trouble, you'll be able to observe and learn things. And then experience worketh hope. And what you'll learn is that troubles produce hope. And I'll explain that this way. One of two things is going to happen with all of your tribulations. The first is the tribulation goes away. And this teaches you that most troubles solve themselves. You may have heard this before. You know what happens a lot with worry? People worry about things that could happen. And what goes on in life is you realize over time, well, there was a bunch of things I was worrying about that never happened. And so it was just wasted energy. It was just fretfulness that accomplished nothing. So worry doesn't really do you much good in life because you worry about things that aren't going to happen. And if you're worrying about something that's going to happen and it does, well, your worrying didn't help, right? It happened anyway. So worry is just wasted effort. It's wasted time. Now, the second thing, so the first thing that can happen with your tribulations is they go away. So you shouldn't be bothered by those. And the second thing that happens is it doesn't go away. And you say, well, that's why I need to worry. Well, look at me at 2 Corinthians chapter 12 and verse 9. 2 Corinthians 12 and verse 9. And he said unto me, my grace is sufficient for thee, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. Now, Paul's talking here about his thorn in the flesh. And so let's just look at the context here for a minute. Verse 7, and lest I should be exalted above measure through the abundance of the revelations, there was given to me a thorn in the flesh, the messenger of Satan to buffet me, lest I should be exalted above measure. So let's focus on that for a minute. When people talk about Paul's thorn in the flesh, sometimes they'll say it's eye trouble. There's all sorts of different interpretations as to what it is. What I find so fascinating is the verse flat out tells you what it is. So just look at it one more time. And lest I should be exalted above measure through the abundance of the revelations. So what Paul had is because Paul was the apostle of the Gentiles, because he received the revelation of the mystery, he received not just a revelation, he received multiple revelations, more than one. And it describes here as the abundance of the revelations. So he has all of these revelations. What is the natural temptation that he's going to face? Yeah, I mean, it would be natural to be puffed up with those abundance of revelations. So God helped him out. What did he do? There was given to me a thorn in the flesh. And then notice this, it defines what it is. The messenger of Satan to buffet me. When you read Galatians 1, Paul writes to the Galatians and he says, I marvel that ye are so soon removed from him that called you into the grace of Christ unto another gospel. What Bible commentaries often do is they'll say, well, the Galatians, they were a fickle people, and they changed their mind all the time, and so Paul left and they changed their mind. And they say these things like they're quoting extra-biblical evidence to prove the Galatians were fickle people. But if you just read the verse, Paul doesn't say, Galatians, you who are fickle, just like I expected, have turned away from me. He doesn't say that. He says, I marvel, I'm shocked, I'm surprised that ye are so soon removed. So here's what I think is happening. You can decide for yourself. If you're Satan, and Satan, by his nature, is a counterfeiter. During the tribulation, Satan is going to have false Christs. In other words, he can't have the real Christ, so he's going to have fake ones. And there's going to be a beast that goes into the temple and shows himself that he's the Son of God. He's a counterfeiter. Well, if Satan is a counterfeiter, And if what God is doing during the dispensation of grace is He has an apostle of the Gentiles to teach the revelation of the mystery and the gospel of grace to the world, what do you think Satan would do in response? He'd have his own guy. If it's the messenger of Satan, he has to have a message, doesn't he? By definition. So here's what I think happens. You can decide for yourself. I think that what Satan does is he has his own guy and he follows Paul around. So if you've ever looked at a map of Paul's missionary journeys, and in fact, let's just do this. Here we go. Look at that. So you can see how Paul travels all over the place, right? Well, let's say you're Satan, and let's say you don't like what Paul is doing at all. The most logical thing to do is to have someone that follows Paul around one city behind. In other words, Paul goes into an area, he preaches the gospel of grace. Satan hates that. Well, don't send your guy in while Paul is there. Paul has the signs of an apostle. Paul should win any dispute like that. What you do is let him leave, then send your guy in there and have him confuse the sound doctrinal footing that had been established. That's why Paul says, I marvel. When Paul writes Galatians, he's not in Galatia, he's left Galatia. He's writing back to them because he's shocked that they have so quickly departed from the truth. I marvel that ye are so soon removed from him that called you into the grace of Christ unto another gospel. So what Paul does in 2 Corinthians 12 is he says, and this is interesting, this is a legitimate request, isn't it? God, I'm going around on all these missionary journeys. I go to places, I preach the gospel of grace, I teach people right division, I get the churches established, and as soon as I get them established, what do I need to do? I got to go somewhere else because you've told me to make all men see. I can't stay there, I got to go. And as soon as I go, you know what happens? The messenger of Satan comes into town and he tears up everything I did. Now, if you were Paul, would you get tired of that? I mean, I would get tired of that. Well, that's the request that Paul's making. In other words, God, make him stop. I'm trying to get your churches established, and he's tearing up everything I do. What God then says to Paul, and this is a lesson for us, what he says to him in verse 9 is, my grace is sufficient for thee. Could God have stopped the messenger of Satan? Obviously. What we are going to face in life, and I pray this myself, I prefer that my troubles go away. That is my first choice. I will be honest with you. I don't ask for more of them. Could I use more patience? Yes. Do I pray, God, look, I recognize it's a character flaw of mine. I need more patience, so if you could send some more tribulation my way, that would be appreciated. I don't pray that. I'll just be honest. I have no intention of praying that. I'd prefer to have fewer troubles, and I would prefer for them to go away. However, as one famous person said, we don't always get what we want. And so if you don't always get what you want, the way that you deal with those things is God's grace is sufficient for you to bear up under whatever it is you need to endure. Now, by the way, let me say this. What does all of this tell you about the health and wellness gospel? Right? Aren't there people on TV that will say, God wants you healthy, wealthy, and wise. And if you're spiritual, God's going to open up the windows of heaven and pour out material blessing in your life. Scripture says the exact opposite of that. Paul has a thorn in the flesh, and God doesn't say anything about, I'm going to deal with it and make your life better. He says, no, it's going to still be there, but I'm going to give you grace to deal with it. That's how real life works. Sometimes things don't get better in an earthly sense, but you have the grace of God to deal with the issue.